Hello, everyone, and welcome to this IO Virtual Meetup. My name is Daniel Erasmus. I work for IO Associates as a software testing recruitment specialist. Joining me today will be Callum Akehurst-Ryan, who is a very sort of senior and experienced tester. Callum, would you care to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so Callum Akehurst-Ryan here. I'm a senior tester, like Daniel said, with about 12 years of experience across different areas, fintech, finance, banking, e-commerce, public health and safety, all those good things. I've been on an amazing technical journey, starting off down the original path of being a very manual heavy scripted tester, all the way through to where I'm at to now. By no means am I an SDIT, but I'm a very technical tester. And I'm also, as I said here, an awesome dungeon master. So yeah, all those good things.
Excellent stuff. Now, we'd like to, before we begin, learn a little bit more about our audience. So if we could start the first poll, and you guys can tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do specifically, just before we carry on. Excellent stuff. So we see we've obviously got a majority of tester. We have a small number of software developers in test, and we've also got hiring managers here today, and then some others as well, who I can only assume are either recruitment or test aficionados either way. So to continue, Callum, will you sort of take us forward? What is an SDET, or a software developer in test?
Yeah, so looking at generally, I pulled together these notes here, just talking to a number of people, but also looking online. What we see is a software developer in test primarily is a developer. Their focus, the test part, is usually focused around automation, focusing on unit tests and integration tests primarily. They're seen as people that can engage in technical discussions, having been starting off as a developer, usually able to talk about code, get into the technicalities of the situation. We sometimes see online there's an exposure to test. So thinking very in those agile worlds ways, T-shaped people, where their primary focus is development, and part of the T-bar there is an exposure to test. And they're frequently seen as a unicorn. They're the thing that hiring managers, really want. You see that all over the website, all over the web. Where can we find SDITs? Where are they? How do I get them? I want them. Testers, on the other hand, just to compare and contrast, are people that champion quality. Their primary focus is on the identification and mitigation of development risks. They bring critical thinking and heuristics into a team. They may have some automation and some exploratory testing knowledge, but they are seen as less technical. Whenever you look online, these people are seen as the non-technical branch of things. So generally, what we're seeing is software developers in test are seen as the technical branch of things that bring in shift left, that bring in automation, that bring in doing coding, whereas testers are still being perceived as these manual experts, or they're seen as a less technical thing.
Okay, so for you, you sort of champion the fact that testers are capable of much more sort of technical stuff. I mean, like, we look at manual testing, there is a lot of technicality within that people don't really seem to sort of understand.
Yeah, the primary thing there is just that focus. If your focus is on development as a developer, what you're thinking about is, how do I code things? How do I build things? How do I, get things going? And that's where your mind space is. As a tester, your mindset is more around thinking, how might this not work? How can I critically think it? How can we make it better? How can we find, identify, mitigate development risks? So it's that different view on things. And as you were saying, there is a technicality to that. Testers can be as technical as you want them to be. It's more about a focus of specialism. So you can have testers that they may not be developers per se, but they can be just as technical. They can write and read code. They can set up an automation framework. They can talk about all sorts of architecture, be it from the front end through any API service levels down to microservices, services, databases, the code, where those sit, up and downstream dependencies. And we'll get into some of those areas as we talk through them, I suppose. But yes, so software developers in test, very technical, focus on developing software. Testers, range of technicalities, focus on testing and identifying and mitigating development risks.
Excellent stuff. So if we move on to the next slide. So I've just need to get this back. I've moved on to right. So why are companies asking for software developers in test, in your opinion?
Yeah, so obviously we've had a chat, so it'd be good to get your view as well as a recruiter and this kind of thing. But from what we've talked about and what I've seen in the industry, there's a number of points here. The first one being that there's been a widespread view that we're moving to agile and continuous delivery. That means that we need people who are basically one-man bands. They can do a bit of everything, they can fit into a team, they can support a team. And continuous delivery especially is seen as something really technical, very technically focused. So we're going to need very technical people, or we're just going to need a team of developers. And side on to that, the next point there, testers are manual only. We get so many conversations, so many viewpoints coming up that what testing is still rooted back in that sort of 1980s view of you call in testers at the end, very waterfall. They come in at the end, they maybe use the UI a little bit. They don't really get involved in the architectural discussions or the technicalities of the system. They don't help code it, they don't help build it. And really, that's what we need. We need someone that's coming in earlier. We're shifting left. We're trying to go earlier with things. Someone that can only, that's it. Someone that's going to contribute to the team. We see a lot of companies that believe that automation is a silver bullet. That if you've got automation, that's all you're testing. That's all sorted. So people will talk either about code coverage, unit test coverage. They'll talk about having like an automation framework in place, and that will be enough for your testing. One of the things that we have to remember when we start getting down that route is automation is great when we're confirming things that we already know, but what about things we don't know? How do we test for those things? How do we test if someone's going to like something using automation? Definitely in continuous delivery, we do want a strong suite of automated checks because they're faster to run and so on, but we need to also understand what are we testing? How do we get that information? How do we make things better? And because of all of these points, we start to see these views of it's the developer's job to test, potentially as a cost-cutting measure to say, you know, if we get a lot of developers, things will come out good. Some people just think, what's the point in testers at all? And it's about educating to say, you know, you have a project manager, you have a scrum master. These people champion process, they champion, you know, the project and the business side of things. You need someone that's going to champion the quality side of things as well. So usually what we're seeing, why people are looking for these SDITs rather than say testers, is just because they want people that are going to be able to come in and actually help their teams. They're so used to testers being separate, doing something that doesn't look like it's going to help the team, but that's not the way that modern testers are going.
So we've had a couple of questions. One from Feezy. So could we say that the SDIT is much more restricted? I'd imagine that is in terms of technical scope because they're more focused on the sort of automation element. Like what in your words, what would you say?
More restricted. That's interesting. So the dirty secret is that everyone can learn to do everything in these sorts of things. Everyone should be able to learn how to champion quality. Everyone should be able to learn how to do code. Everyone should be able to learn how to do automation. Initially, a software developer with a software development background is going to be more focused on confirming behavior. When we look at how developers are trained in testing, usually it's just you knock out your unit tests, yeah, bit of code coverage, jobs are good on. But yes, they're going to be a bit, with that mindset, they're going to be more restricted. They're not going to think about things like, let's say, up and downstream dependencies, look and feel, accessibility, things like functional changes, business requirements, domain requirements, all those sorts of big topics that are just going to get missed by just focusing on like code coverage effectively, just saying, even if we're doing TDD and we're just saying like red, green, go, we're just getting the very basics of things. We might not be getting the general overview of things like negative test cases. We know that generally, when you just have developers designing for tests, things like integration tests tend to be dropped as well. So you need someone that's going to champion those sorts of things and widen that scope and help to widen that scope. It's not because people don't want to do a good job or don't want to check for quality at all. They just need someone to help them identify what should we be testing in those sort of situations.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers that question.
And I got another question. It reads, I once got turned on for a job, a test automation role in brackets, and was told this was because I said I wanted to do both manual and automated testing. What are your thoughts on this? Is it better to have testers who do both, or should testers specialize?
Yeah, so in a team, there's you're going to need to find information out about a product. And we're going to go from where I mirrored on this, it's going to look weird, but where we go from, I know what this should do, all the way through to, no idea. And when we know what something should do, we should be able to automate that. We can regress it. We can say, I know that this behavior should, if I put A in, B comes out. And by doing that, that passes. That's still working, we're good. When I know how something should behave, I can confirm that it still behaves that way. That's really good for automation. That's what we want automation to be. Some computer run checks to save us time so that then we can spend more time investigating information out about what don't we know about the product. Do I know what happens if I throw in a load of emoji into the API? Do I know what happens if I run it on this really old bit of hardware? Do I know what happens in this error condition where I've filled up my basket full of stuff and I go back and forward? What happens then? If I look at it with a number of users, do they like it? Is it accessible? All those sorts of things that we just don't know about it at this point. So I would say you definitely need both of those things. If you come in and say, I'm awesome at automation, I can knock that out for you for the regression side of things, but also I want to be able to use exploratory testing, manual testing. If we call it exploratory, it sort of like differentiates from that old view of scripted tests. Exploratory testing will help us tell us what are we going to test. So automation, we know what we're going to test, tick, 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 tick. Exploratory testing, the manual side of that, looking around the system, what's important to us as a team, where does quality lie? That will then feed into our automation to say, what are we going to test? What don't we know about this product? What do we want to make sure still happens? And especially when products are still being developed, it's really important to start looking around for how they're going to work under different conditions. So again, long way around to answer that, but the basics are, yes, definitely you need both. And being turned down for a role in test because you wanted to do the actual testing side of testing is a bit of a shame.
Okay, and then another question is, where does QA versus QC come into this?
By QC, are we talking quality control?
I would assume so.
So my understanding of quality control is it's a manufacturing thing. That is your gate at the end of something. That's your rubber stamp that basically says, BAMF, yeah, good enough, BAMF, good enough, in a sort of pipeline, a manufactured thing. QA quality assurance is more about embedding a culture of quality, these days at the very least, embedding a culture of quality into a product to make sure that it's the right thing that's being built as we build it. So it's about shifting that development, shifting that quality into the development rather than having a rubber stamp at the end. So when we're talking about all the things that are on the screen now, moving to an agile and continuous delivery, having testers that can do the manual side of things and the automation side of things, and having everybody be involved in testing, that's helping us to build in a QA, an environment of quality within our development and continuous testing. What we're not saying is that we have quality control, we have something at the end that we throw over the fence and so on, because that's not the modern way that we're going to be doing testing.
Okay.
If that's if QC meant quality control in that situation. So if whoever asked that question wants to be more specific, then I'll try and go into that a bit more.
Excellent. We avoid acronyms if possible. Right, and then last question for this section, I feel. We have a question from someone that reads, I found it very difficult to promote SDIT in my previous role and ended up training graduates to do this, which I personally think are the best for SDIT. And I managed to roll out the first automated tested framework for the flagship SW product. Why do you think some conventional organizations still focus on testing and not SDIT? And any thoughts on minimum qualification or experience to become a software developer and test?
So there's a lot there. So
there's a lot there.
Yeah.
I mean, part of that we are covering in the next section anyway.
Yeah, just to touch on it very slightly, I will say the goal shouldn't be, if it depends what your goal is. It sounds like from that conversation that what we wanted was software developers who were going to do a bit of testing. We're just going to focus on that automate everything approach. Were they also trained in with testing heuristics, so rules of thumb? Were they bringing in that shift left mentality and exploring the system to find out what should be tested, or were they very reliant on the team, or were they just doing unit tests? Those sorts of questions are what I'd go back with to ask that, because I would say that you don't need to be a developer in order to be able to run an automation framework. But if you're just a developer, maybe you're not going to have the necessary mindset that's going to help you to explore the system to find these things out, what should be tested. When it comes to quality, what should be tested is way more important than how do we knock out the automation for this. You can get started on an automation framework from scratch within a week, I would say. And the dirty secret is, everybody on the call, the dirty secret is even developers Google things. If you don't have it all squared away in your head, doesn't matter. That's what Google's for. We can look some of this stuff up and get it working. So, with Google in mind and with being able to, a lot of these big frameworks for automation are so well supported by other people. You can ask people around you, and if you've got a team of developers around you, you can get support from them as well. So with that in mind, knowing what to test is much more important. So an ability to critically think about your system and explore it to find useful information within your team and then put it into automation is what's going to be important. So depends what your goals are with that. I would say for really championing quality within a product, you need to ensure that you have that testing mindset as well. Which does lead nicely to this slide. So rather than SDIT, I think it's good to start thinking, shifting to a mindset of thinking about technical or full stack testers. So somebody who is T-shaped with a quality specialism, that they do have that quality specialism, they can jump into the testing side of things, they know what to test, but they're T-shaped enough that they can get involved in the code, they can get involved in helping to write unit tests or integration tests, supporting that, getting in there, setting up an automation framework, whichever one is needed, that they can feed into technical discussions, that they can hold things, the team to account for quality, making sure that we can at that basic level of designing the architecture. But also, like I said, really important is knowing what to test. You can be a really good developer. You can be really hotshot at multiple languages and multiple frameworks. But if you don't know what it is you should be testing, and you don't know how to find issues before they crop up, that's not really going to be helpful to the team, because you're not going to be baking quality in early enough.
Excellent stuff. And then just another one. How can quality be managed in a microservice architecture where 12 teams are working on one platform?
That's a very specific question that goes a bit more outside of the remit of what we would get, well, of this webinar. Generally, I would again advocate for having, so you've got 12 different teams that are all working on these different microservices within a full architecture and so on. You can have the testers again knowing what to test. So gaining that knowledge, going and exploring by talking to the other teams, identifying up and downstream components, talking to each other. If you're familiar with Scrum, you have concepts of Scrum to keep the Scrum teams in position with each other. Do that with your testing. Have quality of quality, or whatever you want to call it, quality of Scrums, where those discussions are taking place, and the tester can then come back and support the team by saying, right, there might be a risk with this interaction between these two microservices. If you're using continuous integration and so on, get the testers in there, get them helping to get them working with the developers to build in service level tests and integration tests as early as possible for between these different microservices, so that then you can promote a culture of small changes to these things, and they can be run quickly through that pipeline. That was a really 1,000-foot view of how do we test a whole project?
That was good. Well, I mean, to be honest, I like that question because it does sort of bring in the importance of quality, and ultimately that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to champion quality. So, what is next? So, to start this one off, can we drop the second poll? Just becoming a technical tester. So what is preventing you? What has stopped you from becoming an SDIT yourself?
And when we say why aren't you an SDIT, I mean, why aren't you a technical tester if you're not? Or sorry, ooh. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's pretty much what I expected, really, to say we don't know where to start on these things. It is really daunting, definitely. So this is something that we can really lean into in this next sort of question and this next section. So yeah, so what I can share is where I've come from, when it comes to being a technical tester. I definitely started as a tester that was focused on manual scripts. I did actually go into project management at one point because I thought, oh, technical, that's a bit scary, but it's really not. If you go through it, you'll find that just with an inquiring mind, you'll really be able to really get into things. So if I do the next slide, here we go. So what do we really need when it comes to being a technical tester? Well, we need a combination of testing skills and technical skills. And most people who are thinking that they are a tester already is going to have the testing skills. They're going to be able to do the risk analysis. They're going to know testing heuristics. So testing heuristics are things like rules of thumb. You might have CRUD, create, read, update, delete when you're looking at data. You might have Goldilocks, too big, too small, just right, things like that. You're going to have critical thinking. You may or may not be doing exploratory testing, but again, as a tester, you're going to know the types of things to be looking into. You're going to be able to communicate issues in a good way and have that empathy with the team. You're going to be championing quality quite often, and you're going to have things like domain and business knowledge. You're going to know things about human factors, all those additional bits of knowledge that comes with being a tester. If you're something like a software developer in test or a more technical tester, you're going to know things about how architecture is set up. You're going to know how to set up automation frameworks, create unit tests, create integration tests. You're going to know a lot about tools, IDEs, Git, all those good things, and probably have an object-oriented language or two under your belt. At the very least, enough to be dangerous with one. And again, you're going to know the types of tests, like we said, unit tests, integration tests, and how to review them. Quite a lot of software developers in test really come into their own when they're looking at things like that. So when we're looking at what do we need to be as a full stack tester, when we're a fully manual tester, we need to be shifting to the technical skills. And when we are a fully software developer in test and automation only tester, we need to be shifting into the testing skills side of things. So I've got the technicality to be able to do, to engage as early as possible into my testing, help write the unit tests, help write service and integration level tests, maybe knock out an end-to-end automation framework, talk about and spot code problems or architectural problems. But I also have those testing skills that tell me, okay, but what else is there? What else other than the technical side of things could I be looking at to help with this? Where could things go wrong? Where are the pain points? So it's about having both of those things.
Excellent stuff. And in terms of resources for people to sort of learn, the more technical skills.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I said I'd talk about the path that I went on. So this is what I found works quite well. So where I started off was very manual. I was looking at test scripts. I was potentially using SQL. And if you can use and understand SQL, you can get into using most other things as well. From there, I really honed into exploratory testing and API level testing. So using something like Postman, using something like SOAP UI, just to make those calls across things, because that gives you an understanding that you've got a front end, you've got the bit that talks between the front end and the back end, the APIs, and then the back end, which you're already looking at because you're doing test scripts in the front end, you're doing the back end using SQL. So you're starting to build your knowledge. Then you can start from that exploratory testing, from that API testing, looking at things like the dev console, start to look at how things are built, look at HTML5, start to look at all the APIs and the WebSockets behind things, how data flows between the system. And then when you've got all that under your belt, you can start to do things like using Postman's automation. Postman is a really great tool for testing APIs, and it has a load of pre-canned tests already in there for you. It's all really well supported. The team at Postman have got loads of wikis, loads of documentation. It's all over the place to really help you get started. They've even got those, like I say, canned tests that's going to support you. Once we've got sort of the idea of those sorts of things, and we've already got started on automation, to be honest with you, we can start looking at things like, let's pair in TDD. Let's work with our developers. We can do pairing in test-driven development. So that's going to mean reviewing the tests at the unit level, starting to understand how code is, start to understand the logic of how services are put together with your developers. We can start to suggest more tests that come into things. So we're bringing the what do I need to learn, what do I need to test into the TDD side of things. A really good way of getting into it is in this test-driven development, you do red, green, deploy, and that does a lot of happy path things. So you can start saying, all right, let's refactor this. Let's add a few extra tests for failing conditions or just for some boundary conditions. You can start to add into that, and that's going to really help out your team. And we can look at things like Gherkin tests. Again, Gherkin is a business-driven or behavior-driven development tool. It's just a layer of human readable language that sits over an automation framework. Getting into the habit of scripting, knowing what to test so that we're not automating everything and compressing down what tests we've got. That's quite an easy way for a tester to get into it, but it does add its own risks in that you're putting a layer of that could fail into your automation suite. From there, like I said, pair to review the unit tests, the integration tests, and so on. And then expand that out. Pair to start debugging issues, sit with the developers, start helping them, look where breakpoints are, look at how the architecture sits together, get your team to like start showing you these things, because they're already showing you behavior. This is just more behavior. So you can really start to cross-pair that knowledge. And as you're helping them with debugging, they're helping you with teaching you some of this more technical stuff, and you're just getting used to things. You'll start to see things like the IDE, for development. You'll start to see things like GitHub, and it will just start demystifying things and showing that they're not that scary. And when you're even doing, excuse me, when you're even doing things like BDD and Gherkin, you might start using things like GitHub. And again, it's a really simple tool with really simple commands. If you can do SQL, like I've got up at the top corner, you'll easily be able to start learning things like git clone, git push, git pull, all those sorts of things. And then when you've got all that, start learning an object-oriented language. I think JavaScript, lots of people hate it. So if you like asserting types, then why don't you marry it? But start learning an object-oriented language. There are Code Academy courses that are really good for these sorts of things, and they will show you how these things are structured. And they go through it practically, so you're not just sat there, you're practically going through things. So I would say, have a look at an object-oriented language. Have a look at Code Academy's JavaScript initial training course, because it will show you it's not that scary. You'll be able to like get the hang of it. And again, you've already done SQL, and by this point, you've looked at Postman, scripting and so on starts to make more sense for you. Just gonna drink a drink of water. And then from there, we can start looking into more a sort of a deeper level of our technical testing. We can start looking at Selenium's UI testing frameworks. So we know maybe JavaScript or whichever language we want. Let's start looking at using Selenium with that. And I say Selenium because it's so well supported. There's so many guides out there. Evil testers getting started with Selenium from the beginning, you can get up and running within a day. And then you'll get the confidence to say, I know what I'm doing with this. And then it's just a case of learning, Googling around to say, oh, if I want to like click on this thing, how do I, oh, that's the syntax. From there, you can start building onto the back-end tests as well. So you've got your UI-driven tests. That's the easiest way to get started. Let's look at back-end tests, which are actually a lot more useful for us. And then we can start getting really modern. Let's look at things like Docker environments, cloud-based architecture. Let's look at orchestration systems for CI/CD pipelines like Docker Compose. Let's look at AWS and how that's used, or things like Kibana. Let's find out all our CI/CD tools like Jenkins, because that's really going to, and like I said, Kibana, because that's going to help you with your testing. Get that information so you can share it across your team. So that's really, I mean, it looks like a lot. And when I started with all this, like the top row there, I started, that was like maybe a year or so, and then another year, and then another year. So it's not like, oh, just jump into it. But it is like jump into it, but it's not like you're going to get there immediately. Work your way through, find a pace that suits you, but you can definitely get there. It's not, it only seems scary because if you start to try and jump into learning code from a developer or as a developer, you're going to think, oh, they do a lot of shortcuts with things. And you're going to say, oh, I need to have like a computer science degree for this. No, you can find training materials that are produced specifically for testers or for people coming in to begin with. Code Academy specifically is really good for that. Or come to webinars, come to testing meetups, because you're going to find people that are able to help you with these things, tester to tester, and be like, oh yeah, that seems really scary. All you do is X, Y, and Z. And that will really set you down the path. If you Google around for some of this stuff, you're going to find a lot of developers talking very specific syntax. Like if you go onto some of the help pages, they're going to get very specific. And a lot of times that's because they've got very specific setups and very like nuanced problems, because they're trying to do things in like the fanciest way possible sometimes. So don't get put off by those. Keep twiddling away and you can definitely get there.
And just to go over a couple of questions now. So why the emphasis on object-oriented as opposed to functional, procedural, or multi-paradigm?
Mostly because a lot of automation frameworks support them, and they are a bit easier really to get started with, I found. It was just a good place to start. If you want to try and dive in to learn something way more complex, that's great, definitely do. What's the payoff for it? If your role is predominantly championing quality and using a framework to check for regression issues, do you need to know one of those more complex languages, or will one of the simpler ones that's supported by a lot of these tools suffice? Obviously, we do want our languages that our automation is in to match up to what we're developing in. So if you are in a C#, a C++, whatever environment, then maybe learn that language, but it is harder. If you can get away with something that's simpler for getting started with, why not, do something that's more achievable?
Excellent stuff. And then, yeah, so I mean, one more thing is, in terms of resources for people wanting to learn more about, Selenium Postman, would you recommend them just getting hold of the sort of open source product itself and having a toy around, or are there any sort of courses that you recommend? Because obviously the languages, we've got great free resources like Code Academy, which is like my personal favorite for Python, but for testing tools specifically.
Yep, so I've just jumped straight to the end of the slide deck, so I'll have to go back to it. But these are some resources that I think are really good. So for exploratory testing, there's loads of stuff out there. Everyone and their dog talks about exploratory testing. Here is my blog post about it. But that will give you, that's a sort of talking to developers about exploratory testing. So it really goes into the details of that. Postman, there's Postman's own website for an introduction to that. That's a really good resource to get into. If you want to start with an object-oriented language, crack on to the Intro to JavaScript on Code Academy. I've used that. It's really good. It's a really good way of getting into things. Getting started with Selenium. Again, Selenium Simplified, and there's Evil Testers pages. There's a lot of videos on there, and it's a really accessible way to get into things. And there's an intro to CI/CD testing, another webinar on YouTube that I've done as well. So there's so much stuff out there that I recommend. Code Academy, Udemy courses on things like CI/CD pipelines is really good. And also meetups. Get into Test Bash, get into Ministry of Testing, go to all of Southwest Test, all of those good things, and start engaging your community, because there are people out there that can really help you with a lot of these things. And the best way of all is, if you're already in a team, talk to your developers and start trying to share things. If you cross-pollinate, you teach them some testing, they teach you some coding, that's a good way as well. Other things I would say specifically for developers to help with is things like Git, like GitHub and Git commands and so on. I learned everything I know about Git from just working with developers in my teams.
Great stuff. And then another question from Sue. I suggest that once you've completed the process, you'll be fighting the company you work for, who will want you to be developing rather than testing because you're cheaper. How do you make sure you stay in test?
Well, putting your foot down mostly. Yeah, that's that's definitely a thing. If we're basically looking for software developer in test is a way of basically hiring cheap developers, then testers and developers need to stand up and say, well, no, we do not want to diminish our skills by basically being hired in to be cheap developers. If you come in and you're in a team, then if your focus is on the in-test part or as a tester, then focus on the testing. Pair with people, do the reviews of the quality, help write the tests, help come up with the test ideas. If people start asking you to, oh, can you pick up this ticket to develop this kind of thing? A low-hanging fruit for that is to say, yeah, I can pair with someone to help them identify the risks and to drive out some more testing around this. But yeah, it does come down to, unfortunately, situations where you might be trying to push into that development role. And if you want to be a tester, be a tester. I've been in different roles where I've been asked to be, say, a Scrum Master or these other things, and I've always sort of bounced back into saying, well, that's just a hat. My role is as a tester. That's what's in my contract. I'm going to do the testing. That comes first. If I want to, for my own personal growth and to develop myself, like do a bit of DevOps or do a bit of like project management, maybe I will, but that's for me to decide. The company's like hired me at this, that's what I'm going to do. Sorry, that's the really aggressive, put your foot down response. Sorry.
Well, I mean, in a lot of cases, I feel like it's needed. Another question from Callum Thompson was, will this PowerPoint be made available after the webinar? I'm sure you can message Callum for it. I mean, this is probably going to be stuck up on YouTube afterwards.
Yeah, we can share that. Not a problem at all.
Excellent stuff. Cool. So that material will be available from either Callum or myself afterwards. And then
do we have, if you have the list of attendees, we can email that out.
Yeah, that's something we can set up. And then onto the sort of final question: do we all need to become SDITs, or are we going to go through another one?
No. Yeah. So I've said no, but ... So really, what we've talked about, we want to be a technical or a full stack tester, which is basically a really awesome tester or a really awesome software developer in test, whichever way round you want it to be. It's about crossing over both ways. You have to have both of these things. You have to be able to hone your testing skills so you know what to test. You're going to need things like exploratory testing. You might want to be a thought leader or a strategist, know about testing strategy, not just say that automation is the best approach for everything. Because let's say we're trying to do accessibility testing or look and feel testing for a branding exercise. Automation isn't really going to help us there. But we also know to be technical enough to be dangerous. We have to be able to engage our teams, be able to shift left into those conversations. So talk about quality earlier when people are coming up with designs for things, requirements for things, when they're coding things, and when it's built. We have to be able to talk about modern concepts, get involved in microservices, talk about things like testing in the cloud and continuous integration, continuous testing. And we have to be able to really learn a language or an automation framework, because automation, the main point of automation as a tester is to get the computer to do the boring testing so that we can do the interesting testing, which is the exploratory, to find out the new information. I always say that if a role is purely automation, that's upsetting for me, because that's the boring bit of testing. That's the tick, 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 tick bit of testing. Whereas I want to be finding new information out. I want to be able to exercise my testing skills, so do the exploratory stuff as well, which is the more creative and interesting side of testing, as well as supporting my team and making sure that I'm championing quality overall. So I would say we don't want to necessarily be an SDIT, but we don't want to just be a non-technical tester. We want to be somewhere in the middle there. That's the good ground. And I will also caveat that by saying all testers are going to have a specialism, but have skills in other areas. So if you're already like a software developer in test, your specialism is going to be the software development side of things or toolsmithing. But you may have specialisms in front end, so human factors style testing, UI and automation, accessibility testing, design and marketing. Oh, you can see that I did bad with my testing there because I didn't capitalize marketing. Yikes. Back end testing. Looking at the code, knowing microservices, knowing unit testing. Goodness me, that's 2 mistakes. Unit testing and integration testing, knowing about the architecture and being able to feed into those sorts of things. You might be a specialist in what tools to use, or a security or pen tester. You might be a performance tester, or going down the DevOps route, be really good at testing in CI/CD pipelines, finding out information and data handling from that. You might be great at test strategy. That could be your specialism, but you have to know a lot about other bits of testing in order to feed into that strategy. Or you might be a specialist at being exploratory testers. So it's not wrong to have that specialism, but do know that you can't just have the specialism. You've got to be able to pick and involve yourself in conversations in all these different things, which is why it's so important when we say or see conversations where, oh, we don't need testers. Testers bring so much to a team, like just from all these sorts of things that we're seeing here. If you've already spent your focus on looking at things like code, building and designing software, there's not a lot more space for championing all these other types of things. So having a tester to offload that onto to help the team with that is really important. So they've got to be technical, but they've also got to know all those testing things as well. Because I don't know a lot of sort of like deep software testers that are going to be that into going, oh, let's look at marketing or the psychological impacts of the colors that are being chosen for the UI. But a tester might be able to help with that sort of side of things.
So on to your questions.
Mm-hmm.
So you come at this from an individual's point of view. Where does the role of test manager stand in all this? From Sue.
Interesting. So from a test manager point of view, I see in a modern environment, a test manager is someone who is going to focus more around the strategy of testing. It's a role that is slightly less utilized these days, I believe. But where they do exist, it's usually as a very senior tester. They're mentoring others. They're being a thought leader. They are helping people with the strategy around what we're going to test. How do we bake in automation? What are we going to look at with performance? And unblocking those sorts of issues. And maybe at a company or not just a team, full company level, going forward with how are we going to test? What's our strategy as a company? How do we get all these disparate parts working together? And that requires having all these bits of knowledge about modern testing things. Some people are going to find that they've been a test manager for a long time, that the strategy side of things is where they really want to be. And that's great. That's where their Tshaped, their specialism, their deep specialism is going to be. But you do have to know the minutiae of all the other things as well to be able to talk about them and help people do these sorts of things. And you see a lot of test managers now, they're writing books, they're doing a lot of these sorts of things like webinars, they're being thought leaders, they're really helping other testers and mentoring them and just showcasing to the business and to their technical colleagues that testers are really useful, that they can bring a lot to a team and that they can help embed in embed in quality as early as possible. You can also, if you really like the leadership side of things, get a Scrum Master qualification, help the team in that sort of direction, so that you're still embedded into a team, still able to do the testing and that sort of side of things, but you're still able to do the management side of things. And mostly I'm speaking to that as someone that's been very focused in Agile side of thing, Agile teams who are very self-managing. So there isn't necessarily a role for an overall test manager, but definitely from a mentoring and building strategy side of view, that sort of thing is quite useful.
Right. And then I've got a really good question here from Stuart. And this is going to sort of tie back to actually an article that you wrote about why you're talking to developers about exploratory testing. So Stuart asked, as someone who has over time gone from manual tester to full stack developer, a big problem I saw was when a company moved to teams with SDIT/developers, that test type roles is from developers having to pick up testing for the first time. What's a good way to get the exploratory testing instinct ingrained into developers? A lot of my attempts were met with grumbling and comments of developers can't be good testers. And this is something you're passionate about.
So yeah, I mean, if we're saying that developers can't be good testers, then SDITs is a bit of a problem, isn't it? But so the first thing I do when I join a new team of developers is I explain, first of all, what I'm going to do to help them. You're there to support the team, you're there to support the developers overall. And I try to build up a contract so that they can hold me to account for things. I come in to say, right, here's how I'm going to unblock a lot of stuff for you. I'm not here to basically hold you to account. I'm not here to like smack you over the head and say, haha, you've done that wrong. I'm here to basically support things. So I'll talk about levels of knowledge, information, and then we're trying to gather different types of information through exploratory testing. I will talk about how I will work on tickets to identify risks as early as possible so that we can start building those in. I talk about how I'm happy to pair with developers to give them that kind of view of quality so that it's not coming as a surprise when I start testing for things, or let them pair with me when I am testing for things to sort of get an idea of these sorts of things. If you look at my article, why I'm talking to developers about exploratory testing, there's a lot of things in there, but the main thing is to basically come in straight off the bat to say, I'm here to work with you, I'm here to support you as a tester, and whether that means I'm going to help review and write some of these unit tests, take that off your hands, the integration test, take that off your hands, work with you on that, I'm going to come up with the risks in advance and shove them onto the ticket in mind map form or a list or whatever, so you've got an idea of the types of things to add into your unit tests. I'm going to do exploratory testing with you so you can see these sorts of things, or at least feedback within the hour of doing exploratory testing, so that we've got that good repertoire of information. I'm going to help you debug things. If there's a problem in live, sit with the developer and say, right, I know this behavior, this, and this, because they're looking deep down at services and so on. You might be able to help them with some things and go, all right, if we do this and this and this, shove a breakpoint in there, let's look at the information. Show that you're technical, show that you can get into unit tests and integration tests, so that show that you're on the same page. And when something fails, show that you're willing to help try and fix it as well. So that should hopefully build those bridges and stop the grumbling and so on. And over time, you start to see, because they see the value in all this stuff, they start to want to get engaged. I had a developer who was very reticent initially of having an exploratory tester in, but when they found out that when there was a problem or a bug, I was straight in there going, right, I'll start looking. Here's where this is. Here's where this is. Yeah, this service is actually throwing this error, and it's related to this input and this API. They started to see the value in going, oh, you've just saved me all that debugging time, and now I can do that and get back to development. So working with people is really going to be helpful for some of that stuff. Not just some of that stuff, all of that stuff. And you can just share that knowledge and yeah, just be useful to people, really, and just show that you're working together.
Excellent stuff. And then another question was, what does Tshaped mean?
Oh, sorry about that. I should have been better to explain it. So in an agile environment, you have the idea of this T-shaped person. So the top bar of the T is basically like a breadth of low levels of knowledge, whereas the T spoke that comes down indicates like a long depth of knowledge of something. So in my top T, I might be good at a lot of different things. So I might be good at a bit of coding, a bit of agile, a bit of management, a bit of talking to people. And then my bit down here that I'm really deep at, like if you thought of it as a graph, this really long bit is my specialism. So I've got a lot of knowledge about testing or a specific type of testing. You've probably seen those things that are like many spokes off a like pentagram or something, and then a graph that goes around them to indicate different like ability scores. That's basically the same thing. It's just T-shaped is a shorthand way of saying somebody that's a bit of a generalist at a lot of things in the top bar, and then a specific specialism in an area. So in your team, you might have someone with a quality focus. Their branch on their T is about testing. You'll have a lot of people who are good at front end or back end developers. You'll have someone that's an agile specialist, maybe a scrum master, but who knows bits about the other stuff. So things like that, really. So they can pick up other things, but they definitely have a specialism. And that lends itself to really saying, like, you could, with T-shaped people, you could build a backend full of front-end developers that have had exposure to the backend, but you probably wouldn't want to. So when it comes to testing, you probably want to test with people that have a specialism in testing rather than exposure to.
Excellent stuff. And then another question we have from Daniel is, do you have any experience or know if testing techniques such as contract testing, such as Pact, and mutation testing, such as Striker, is used successfully, and what stage in the software development process it is usually introduced? What advantages does it provide when used in addition to unit integration and end-to-end testing?
Yeah, again, very specific question about a specific type of testing. So yeah, contract testing, you can start to knock out very quickly as you're building new APIs. You can use that in lieu of integration tests, or as soon as you've got, say, a Swagger file, you can knock out your Swagger for your API. Which is a basic blueprint framework of your API. You can start doing contract tests to see what sorts of responses are coming back, so to help you design and develop for it. Mutation testing is used all over the place. You can use it in unit tests if you want to. It's just a way of mutating code and mutating inputs and outputs to basically sort of just change them sort of character by character. So there are tools that can allow that. I haven't seen it implemented anywhere specifically. If I were going to try and use it, I'd probably integrate it into a CI/CD pipeline that was already well established, so that it could pick up if there were a mutation, if there were a change to the code in an unexpected way, that it would be picked up by the CI/CD pipeline and thrown out rather than implement a failure. Probably, but I haven't seen it specifically used elsewhere. Like, yes, sorry.
Great, good answer. And another question we have is, in a small team, you might not be able to have all the skills required. How would you grow your skills to build at the top of the T to get a better understanding?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So when we don't feel that we do have those, when we're not able to support our team as best we can, we need to be open and honest about those sorts of things and start to identify what is the key things that we're not able to hit at this time that's going to allow us to build up and support our team. Ideally, we'd do that through pairing. So if you were to go to your team and say, look, there's this ticket I need to do, I need support on that. Can somebody pair with me and show me the ropes on this? That's a good way to get going on something. Or does anybody have any ideas for how to train on these sorts of things? As any sort of like direction you can give me? So step up, try and take it on, try and get to pair with someone to get that mentoring. And that's the best way to get started, or at the very least, go down a direction for it as well. If your teams are so small and so fast paced that you're not able to get any of those resources or those times or that support, it may not be at this time an environment in which you can start learning new skills. I wrote an article a long time ago, starving men can't learn how to fish. So this is if you give a man a fish or if you teach him to fish. If you're starving, you can't learn to fish. You just need fish. So you just need someone else to help you. You just need someone to do it for you. And that's in that kind of environment where it's all go, go, go. You don't have the capacity for learning. But if there is the capacity for learning, pairing is definitely the way to get started on that. And remember to make sure that, because you do have that specialism, that T branch in whatever you are, that you're reciprocating and you're trying to help where you can, and you're showing that you're adding value and you're showing your interest into these sorts of things as well. It's not because we're not doing code because we're not interested in what they're doing. We're not doing code because we need the support to get into it in the first place. And we can straight away add value by bringing our testing to the unit tests and so on.
Stuff. And then back onto the QA manager topic, what do you recommend for being a sole QA manager without a test team?
What do I recommend if you are a sole QA manager without a test team?
Yes. So
okay.
I'm assuming in terms of your lineage, in terms of your learning, or what skills you'd bother learning for that position.
Yeah. So again, it's the same as everything else. If you've ascended to the rank of a test manager, there's an expectation there that you're going to be able to have a lot of knowledge, a lot of modern knowledge on different testing techniques and different technical techniques and different technicalities and architectures of systems, so you can support strategy for a company or support strategy across teams. If you don't have a team, then you're not managing, then instead you've become the sole quality champion for things. So you need to be coming into teams, helping people to understand where quality sits, how to shift left with testing, how to inform and do their own exploratory testing, how to find out what to test and then implement that. So coming up with that strategy, really pushing it, really helping, showing the teams that they need those sorts of testing activities to take place, or potentially they need coaches for testing. So a tester to come in and support that. That's the best thing that you can be doing in those sorts of things. But it does, again, require you to be technically led. In modern testing, test managers really have to become thought leaders, strategists, but also very technical as well. It's not just about people management, because you can shift into being a scrum master and an agile coach, sort of like for that side of things. But if you want to stick into the testing, then look at strategy, think of modern ways of doing things, keep up to date with these sorts of things, and find ways to support the company by showing your teams how to champion their own quality and how to get involved in things.
Okay, and then if we do one last question, because we're past 8 now. And this is actually quite a good one because it goes back to pairing. How do we respond to arguments against pairing? For example, it slows development.
Interesting. Well, my usual argument for that is that if you find a bug too late, that's really going to slow development because you have to unpick everything and debug it and so on. If you find it up front, then it's really going to support the whole team. You're going to get the support of the team for that. So it does make things faster overall. If people are being bullish and they're just focused on tickets and they're just focused on not supporting the team, then sometimes you're not going to win them over. So what I've done in the past with those sorts of people, I've come in at the end. I've focused on exploratory testing and I've sat them down and I've said, okay, here are the areas where there's been failures. So I found this error, this error, this error, this and this and this. These are things that haven't been thought of. Let's look through the unit tests together, and add those in now. So really come forward to start saying like, well, I've still tested it, just to show them that, now it's taking them longer because now they've had to sit and listen to me go through a whole mind map of tests, and they've had to sit with me and tell me about all the unit tests, and so you can do it that way. Sometimes you're just not going to be able to win people over completely, and you'll just have to sort of back away from that and just ease in. And there's other people in the team. If all of your developers are basically saying that, then there's not much you can do other than just knock out the tests. And if you're happy doing that, then that's cool. But if you're not, talk to people about it, raise it in retros, talk to whoever the Scrum Master is or leaders, raise it in your stand-up to say, hey, I want to start trying to shift left and look at this ticket. Just as a thought, one thing I've done, I've put risk maps on new tickets. So as these developers, because I wasn't able to pair with them, I started just looking at tickets and going, right, this is a database. What are all the risks related to a database? Too much data, too little data, it crashes, all these types of things. Building all these mind maps up, dumping on the ticket, and just in the standard going, oh yeah, I've put loads of risks. If you could make sure that you've got that covered off in your testing from your unit tests, happy to pair with you if you want to go through it and cut it down. But otherwise, yeah, you go for it because you're really fast. So that's another way of going for with it.
Brilliant stuff. And that's about all we have time for. Thank you so much, Callum, for your time today. And
no
thank
problem.
you so much to everyone who's attended. And we will be putting out all of the relevant information from this. Feel free to contact us afterwards if there's anything specific that you'd like from this talk. And we will be back soon, hopefully, with another installment.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.